Sounds good.
Welcome everybody. Tad Hargrave here, dimly lit. It's late at night, later than I normally do one of these events, and we're here with Natalie Pepin, who's going to be talking to us about food security. I've been hyping this one up for a bit, and so I'm glad for those of you who've made it and those of you who are now watching the recording, glad that you get a chance to do this. I've known Natalie now for a lot of years, one of my dearest friends in Edmonton, and she's living this homesteading life out in the country about an hour and a half north of Edmonton. And so this also means the internet connection is not consistent. So, but there'll be a lot of slides. And so, you know, if her mouth is not moving at the same pace of the words, have some mercy that this is evidence of somebody who's actually living in the way that a lot of us dream about living, getting out of the city and, you know, getting into the bush and getting back to basics, as it were. So this topic to me is so important, and in some ways it may seem like it doesn't fit in a marketing for hippies thing, but I just want to draw the connection briefly, but as clearly as I can. You know, I've been saying it for a number of years that the two things we're trying to do with marketing, the kind of foundation stones of the archway of marketing, are goodwill and sustenance, meaning we have to do our marketing in such a way that it actually fosters goodwill between ourselves, the clients, and within the marketplace in general. But that sustenance is a thing. It's got to feed somebody. It actually has to work. It's got to put a roof over your head and food on the table. So to me, this fits very much in that. My interest for you all is your capacity to sustain yourself. And there's no more basic component of that than food. I don't suppose it's something I focused on because food has been so abundant, but now we're starting to see shipping interruptions everywhere. We're seeing bare shelves in the States and other countries too. And I would submit we are in the early days of this, and it's likely to get a lot harder. So this is something that's so important to wrap our heads around, and yet it's difficult to. I know, just like within marketing, it's hard to wrap your head around it from not knowing anything. And same with this kind of food security. So do I just get a bunch of cans of beans and that's it? And what do you do? How do you approach it? So Natalie is somebody who helped me last year because I could see the writing on the wall that this was probably coming, and I said, could you help me get some food together? And she did. And, you know, just, but have you thought about this or this or this? And of course I hadn't thought about any of it. So she helped me come up with a game plan. Even recently, we just had a bit of a conversation about it. And so in the same way that you all help people in things that they're clueless about, this may be an area that we just haven't focused on much, but Natalie has. And well, I just couldn't be happier to have her here, to have her as a friend, as a resource to all of you. So Natalie, over to you.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful introduction and for the explanation of rural internet, the joys of rural internet. So I'm going to be sharing some slides, and I thought I would use my phone for this portion where I'm actually talking to you by video. And I'm going to switch over to my laptop with some slides and some audio, and we're going to take a break about halfway through for just a few minutes so that I can make sure that my devices continue to work effectively based on their battery power. So we'll have a bit of a break when that comes. And if for any reason anything pauses for me, just know that I'll be back in short order, as my connection is never down for more than a few moments when it does go down. So I do apologize for those interruptions, but I thank you for your patience and for your willingness to see this through and to have this conversation. So I'm going to start sharing my slides here on my laptop, and I'm going to hop over onto the computer when I do that. So we'll pull this up here. So this presentation that I'm going to give to you, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is I do and why, but also some of the perspectives or important understandings when it comes to developing or working towards our family's food security, what those are, so that you can share in some basic understanding on those topics, and also so we can have a rich conversation so that you know where I'm coming from as I talk about these things. Now, I think it's really important before we get too far into things that you know where I'm personally coming from with this, who I am and why I'm here in front of you. So I'll start with a quick introduction, and I'll share more about my story as we go, because I think that's important in understanding where it is I've come from with this. But I'll start with saying Tanshi, Kiowao, Natalie Pepin, Dishnikashun, Pikakisimo Isqueo, Nitugasun, Toatinao, Niwiken, Pe Winnipeg Duschin, Cuthbert Grant, P. Jean-Baptiste Richot, P. Pierre, P. Mary Falcon, Ni Parenti, Kaya Shoshichin. So hello, everybody, and welcome. It's good to see you here. My name is Natalie Pepin, and in Cree, my name is Prayerful Woman. And I am up here in the Tawatna Valley, which it's actually Towatinau, which means valley. And in English, we say valley, valley, because English does funny things like that. But we'll go with it. That's okay. And I am originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's where my ancestors are from, and that's where I was born. And I introduced a few of my ancestors, including Cuthbert Grant and Jean-Baptiste Richot and Pierre and Mary Falcon, who are very important figures in my nation's history. And I'm a Métis woman. I live here in Northern Alberta, and I live off grid. We live a homesteading life with my children, where we grow food and we teach traditional skills and we harvest off the land. I teach Indigenous arts and traditional skills in my day-to-day. And you might be wondering, well, how the heck does that connect to food security today? And my connection to food, it comes from my connection to my culture. As a young person, I was about to become a mother, and all these things started to become important to me that hadn't been important to me before, because I was now responsible for other lives. And some of those things that became important to me was the ability to feed them. And this brought me to some of the traditional skills that my family and my ancestors practiced in terms of managing a food supply. And it's one of the ways, these traditional skills, that I connected with my culture back in the day. But there's more to this story that I'll share in a moment. Before I share any more about who I am and where I'm coming from with this, I want to share something about you, or about me, with you. And I call this my bag. It's my big audacious goal. And my big audacious goal that you're a part of right now, you being here, you're a part of this, is to connect with 10,000 families over the coming year on the topic of food security, to help bring some knowledge, awareness, and skills to them in one way or another. And the second number here on the screen, it's 1,000. That's the number of families that I have a goal of helping directly to take action on their family's food security. So the first number is a bit bigger, and that's to bring knowledge to people. But the second is to bring action to people. So by being here, you're participating in helping me towards this goal, and I thank you for that. I thank you for your time. I feel like this is very important information, and clearly you do too, because you're here. So that's a beautiful thing. And I'll talk more about this goal at the end. As we visit with each other and chat with each other, there's a question that I hope you'll hold in the back of your mind. And that is, what is food security to my family? Now, your family might be a family of one, and that's perfectly fine. Or you might be one and a roommate, or one and a pet, or you might have a partner or children or a large extended family. Whatever that context is for you, I'll ask you to hold in the back of your mind while we're going through this, that question. Our questions, they drive the investigation that we will make in our lives. It'll drive our interests and our behaviors. And by holding a good question, you're going to come to some good conclusions. I used to ask the question, what am I going to buy for groceries for my family on my next payday? And I've done away with that question many, many years ago now. And now my question is, what does food security look like for my family? And how am I going to build that food security? So I invite you to ponder this in your life and today. So I'll return to my story here while we keep those other things in the back of our mind. And that's, how did I get to this point? And, when it comes to marketing, Tad has an absolutely beautiful story about two islands, point A and point B, and the importance of those islands in telling your story in marketing. And when it comes to food, I feel like it's equally important to know what my point A and my point B was. And then the rest of the time, we'll talk about how we got there from point A to point B. And maybe some of these points will be familiar to you in your life. So point A for me was when I was becoming a mother, as I talked about earlier. And I recognized deeply that I had this responsibility for another life. And so I began to learn a whole bunch about how to be a mother. And one of those things was about food. And at that point in time, I didn't grow up preserving food or having food storage or really having many other experiences around food beyond that. I grew up with 6 siblings, and our grocery shopping trips were absolutely enormous, so enormous. And that actually grocery shopping was a point of stress between my parents. They used to fight about it all the time because it cost so much to raise a family. And so my memories around food are formed by that experience of how much it took to feed my family on a day-to-day basis, and knowing that food can be a source of strife in relationships and in people's lives, and not wanting that for my family. I didn't get to see my family garden or preserve food or anything like that, though. So my experience in understanding of food security was grocery shopping. Now, at this point, when I was becoming a mother, I was working in construction. I actually was studying photovoltaics to be a solar installer once upon a time. And this was back when this was actually pretty new in North America. There was only 2 programs that you could get into. And for one, you had to already be an electrical engineer. And for the other, it was to be an installer. And I found this program at Seneca College, and I was studying to be a photovoltaic installer. And I was working towards an apprenticeship. I was wiring homes and learning about electricity and how it works in our residential settings. And while I was working there, I was making a good living. I was really actually enjoying life at this point. I really enjoyed working in the trades. It felt very rewarding. However, there was a challenge, and that challenge was that physically it took its toll on me to the point where I was no longer able to work. I was actually injured at work. I fell from the roof of the house that I was wiring, and I damaged my knees very, very badly. I fell directly onto them, and I was off work. I couldn't work anymore. And I was doing rehabilitation for my knees to be able to walk again. And at this point, I was making so little on WCB that we lost our home. And we had to choose between making car payments, making our rent, and buying food. And even after we lost our home, it was still hard to buy food. And for the first time in my life, I experienced true food insecurity, where I didn't have the ability to go buy groceries for my family. And so we ended up using the food bank for quite a while in order to feed our family. And I had 2 children by the point that this came about. And, it was really humbling, and it really changed my perspective on what food security meant. Food security, it wasn't just going to the grocery store, because clearly I had no ability to go to the grocery store at that point. I had to rely on my community for food. And so this experience was really, as I said, humbling. And what I ended up doing is really turning to what it is that I'm going to do with my life. And I changed my perspective quite dramatically. I changed from working on or towards my education in photovoltaics to studying the environment. And this was a really positive change in the end, but it was really trying during that period. So what I also ended up changing about my life was my perspective about food security. And I wanted to learn how to provide my family with that security, regardless of what my employment status was going to be. Because what I learned very quickly is that that can change in a matter of seconds. Your employment can change. And I know a lot of people have experienced this over the last 2 years, where a lot of people have been out of work or unable to make a living. And from that, I developed the desire to change the fact that I had not the skills, the food, the knowledge, or the equipment to feed my family in those circumstances. So I'm gonna stop there from point A, and I'm gonna jump forward to where we are today. So point B. Nowadays, I live off grid in a homestead that we have been building with our own hands, and we raise our food. I know how to preserve, to grow food, how to raise animals, and I've developed the skills to make it all happen. I have a 1 to 2 year supply of food at any given moment. So if I lose my ability to work, I can feed my family for at least another year with what I have available to me right now. And I have all the essential equipment and resources on hand to do this in perpetuity, meaning I have seeds, I have livestock, I have the means to feed my livestock, I have all of the equipment that I would need to continue to grow and preserve food for my family. And I can tell you with all seriousness that there is no greater feeling of security that I have ever found than knowing that I could provide for my family in no matter what the future throws at us, that we have what we need to survive. Now, in the days of Walmart, where we typically just go purchase what we need to survive, this is a very different perspective. And it's taken a lot of work to get here. It's taken me 20 years to get from point A to point B, and a lot of learning along the way about what food security looks like and how to build it. And in order to begin to build that food security, the first thing that I began to realize is that I had barriers to my family's food security. And primarily those barriers were that the people, resources, information, skills, and materials that I required in order to feed my family, those did not exist within my home. I relied on others for that. And specifically, I relied on an economic system of me being employed and receiving a paycheck and other people bringing food and me buying that. And that was my only source of food security. And that's why I experienced so much insecurity. I didn't have enough food in the house to make it for more than a week at a time, because that's how often I would go grocery shopping. So that lack of food in the home, but also the lack of resources to produce food, to grow food, to preserve it so that I could have greater food security. I didn't have any of that either. So this situation of experiencing these barriers and beginning to identify them, it gave me a new perspective. Now, in permaculture, I exist within the world of permaculture and part of my life, both in the farm that I've had and the food that I've grown for others, and also the way that I design and build my life. And one of the sayings in permaculture is, the problem is the solution. And I don't think there's a more confusing saying in the entire body of what we would call permaculture than this one. It confuses a lot of people because it's not very intuitive. Clearly, the problem and the solution must be different things, or else the solution would already exist. And that's just it. The solution does exist to these barriers. And these barriers are actually showing us where we can develop robust resilience. It's pointing to those places where we can give effort and focus in order to develop our food security. So when I recognized, there's these problems because I don't have what it takes to provide my family with food security, those things that I didn't have became the focus for me of developing that knowledge and those relationships with people so that I could have food security for my family. So it was all about me bringing home those resources and relationships, the skills, materials, information, all of those things, bringing them home so that I would have those resources and those opportunities for food security rather than barriers. Now, this list of things that I needed to develop, I developed an actual process, a planning process around food security based on those things. And I call it the Prism process. And it's a planning process you can apply to anything. So I'm going to explain it, and we're going to go through an example of how this works. But the Prism process, it takes these potential barriers to food security, and it helps you break it down to see the opportunities there. So we're going to use those people, resources, information, skills, and material as a way to build food security. So I'm going to give an example of how this works. And when I first started working towards my family's food security, I had a very small garden, especially when you compare it to my garden today. And I remember the first time I grew carrots successfully, and they were tiny and stubby and pitifully small. And there was very little yield, but I was so proud that I grew some carrots. And since then, I have developed this full prism, and now I can grow really wonderful carrots. In fact, I pride myself on my ability to grow carrots nowadays, and to be able to grow enough for my family and to store them for a full year. I am able to have carrots from 1 year clear until the next year when carrots are once again up in my garden. And I feel like that's an incredible accomplishment for our food security goals as a family. So I'm going to show you how we use this Prism planning process. And so what we do is we select a topic in the world of food security. We select a topic. And so for our topic in this example, we'll have carrots. And then we think about, well, how am I barriered to having carrots as a part of my food security? You know, maybe I don't have people to learn from. I never had somebody to show me that. And so the opportunity then is to find people to learn from. And maybe I didn't have seeds, or I didn't know where to go get them. And so the opportunity there is to learn who I can buy seeds from, or who I can trade with to get seeds. And perhaps I also need help. And so those would be the relationships. So I have it labeled people, but really this is relationships there. And then there's resources that I might need. Now, there's materials and resources. Materials are physical things that I can buy, I can own them. Whereas resources, those are things available to me, but they might not be mine. So for example, I might have a resource of YouTube videos that people who are just superb at growing carrots have put out. And there might be a resource of money. And I put a question mark there because some would argue that we own our money. Some would argue we don't, but it's sometimes there for us to use as a resource. And then we also have things like seed catalogs to help us understand the different varieties of carrots, or which one is appropriate for us to grow. So that's a resource available to us. And I'm just going to do a quick switcheroo here. So pardon me. All right. There we go. There we go. So I will continue there. Thank you for that momentary lapse. So the other thing that we have in our Prism planning process is information. We have the need for information. We need to know how far apart to grow these carrots. We need to know what depth we're going to plant them at, how much water to give them, or how to help them germinate properly. That was my biggest challenge early on when I was growing carrots. And then there's skills. I used to farm. I had a CSA and we fed 100 families. And so I'd get volunteers every now and then to come and help with that. And I had somebody come help me weed one time. And it was, wonderful that she wanted to help, but she kept pulling out my carrot seedlings instead of the weeds. And I realized in that moment that I had developed the skill of noticing which was a carrot and which was a weed without really focusing on it. It was just easy and fast for me to weed my garden. And then another skill that I had to learn was how to get those carrots out of the ground when you have lots of clay in your soil without breaking them. Because when you're farming, people don't want to buy broken carrots. They want lovely, long, fresh looking carrots. And so I had to develop that skill too. And then, of course, there's all the materials. There's the garden hoe, or I really like using a strap hoe, and you might need a rake. You need seeds, a tarp, perhaps, to help promote germination, some way to water the garden, and a digging fork in the end. So what this has done is it's broken down all the things that I need to collect or work on in order to grow carrots effectively. And then I can tackle each and every one of those separately in many different ways. I might barter for some equipment. I might not have a rake and I need one. So I might go to my neighbor and say, hey, do you have any old equipment for the garden that you don't need anymore? And this is actually how I got a lot of my gardening equipment. Is one of my older neighbors was just not able to garden anymore and didn't want to have to take it to the dump. And so I said, oh, well, I'll take that. I'll use it. And I have developed quite the selection of gardening apparati in that way. And so there's different ways we can meet these needs that we have identified through this Prism planning process. So this is one tool that's available for you in working towards your food security. And this is a tool that we use in the programs that I run on the topic of food security. But I also want to introduce some different areas, some focus areas where that Prism planning process might be valuable to you. So we have these different notions of what food security is. And I mentioned earlier that my notion of food security once upon a time was going to the grocery store. But I'm going to introduce you to some other possibilities of what food security might look like for your family. So the first is looking at food security as food storage. So when I lost my job and my ability to work, I didn't have food storage. I had perhaps what we might call an emergency supply. So this was enough to get us through the next few days. However, I didn't have anything that could get me through to the next time I would be able to earn an income. It was 6 months before I could return to work, before I could walk properly. And I did not have enough food to make it through that period or the resources to do that. So when we look at food storage, we're looking at 3 different timeframes. We have that emergency timeframe, and that might include just the food that you normally have in the house. And we might consider that an emergency supply, depending on how much you have available at any given moment. Different people's lifestyles or context, the number of people that they have in their family will determine how long their food stores actually last. The next level that we have is our short-term food supply. And this is typically 3 weeks to 3 months. And this includes a lot of your staples like your rice and pasta. And this is where I usually recommend that people set the goal is to have a 3 months food supply. If you've lost your job and you're needing to find a new one, or there's challenges in the global economy, having a 3-month food supply is usually going to get you through to the next season where you can begin to find other sources of those foods. And then we have a long-term food supply. This is what I call a survival supply, not in the sense that it's for emergency survival, but that my family could survive on it for 3 to 12 months. And this is a long-term goal when it comes to food security for a lot of people, is that they want to have that supply like their grandmothers used to have, so that they could have that security from one season to the next. For my family, this looks like enough food to last us until the next garden season and about 6 months past that, because our gardening season, it takes a while to grow our food. And so I need to know that I'll have food until the garden is up next time, or until the next, the next batch of hogs are going to be ready, or whatever that is. So this food storage as food security is a good place to start for people. It's having that food storage in your pantry, or in your root cellar, in your shed, your garage, under the bed, all of those different places where people get creative about storing their food storage supply. This gives you a sense of security, but only for so long. This is a short-term fix to a really, truly multifaceted part of our lives. And so when we have this short-term food supply or long-term food supply, it eventually has to be replenished, because you'll use it up eventually. And some of these things, they have an expiry. So you would need to use them by a certain point. And that brings us to our next focus on food security, which is food production as food security. So this is things like gardening. I mentioned I didn't grow up seeing anybody garden, but that I had to gain those skills, because every year we're given an opportunity to build our food security in many different ways. And one of those is gardening. Now, for some people, they live in an apartment. And so gardening might mean having some planter boxes on the patio, or growing some microgreens in their kitchen. But it also might look like community gardening. It might look like having a plot on a community farm and going out to help with that. Or it might mean having a CSA share, or buying into a farm that is community based. And all of those can serve to meet that food production, food security aspect. Now, after gardening for a little while for other people, I truly detested it for a while. I was farming, or I had a CSA, which means community supported agriculture, and we fed 100 families in our third year. And at that point, there was so much work around gardening and making sure that all of those families got their food every week, that we often went without. We often didn't have enough left over for our own family. And all of it had to go to our customers, to the families we were feeding. And I was working approximately 16-hour days to make that happen. And I was burnt out, and I just didn't want to weed the garden ever again. And it took a little while after we decided to really turn our focus towards our own home. It took a little while to start loving it again. And I truly love it again. It's very meditative. And I just love watching those plants come up in the garden and knowing that that's my family's food for the coming year, and the sense of pride and accomplishment in stewarding or midwifing those lives in the garden so that they can come to maturity. It's a really, really rewarding experience. Now, the next aspect of food production as food security is raising livestock. And clearly this isn't going to work for everybody. Again, if you don't have the ability to raise livestock yourself, there are many other options, from supporting local farms and CSAs to buying into, again, like a cow share or a hog share, or what we would call a meat share, where people go in together and purchase an animal and divide it up. And it's sent for butcher, and then they can all divide that up and use it for their families. So those are other options. But for me, I was teaching business in Calgary right before I moved up to start farming, and my greatest desire was to have chickens and a milk cow. And when I got up to the farm here, to this valley where I've been farming, I promptly purchased chickens and a dairy cow. And it was among the most rewarding experiences also, where I could develop a relationship with these animals and care for them. And I could rest easy knowing that they were being given a life that was free from cruelty, where they could be outside expressing themselves in their natural state as closely as possible, and that they were eating clean food, and that they were happy. And this was a really important thing for me. I was once upon a time a vegan, and my primary reason for that was that I wanted animals to be treated appropriately. I wanted them to be treated properly and well, and that they shouldn't experience a lot of trauma in their lives. And I later discovered that by raising
my own livestock, I can also assure that. And that's been a beautiful part of our lives, to again steward those lives and to be there as those animals are born and to raise them. Now, as I said, that's not for everybody, and that's okay. There's also the opportunity to have wild sources of food. So this might be through hunting for meats, or it might be through foraging or gleaning. Our family has the goal of transitioning our diet to a mostly wild diet, and it takes time. It takes time, but what I'm realizing is that the wild plants around me do so much better than the gardens. They're so much more robust and healthy and vigorous, even through a changing climate. And so this past year, I decided not to grow spinach. And instead, I harvested lamb's quarters that seem to always want to grow in my garden, whether I want them to or not. So I've learned to let them have their space and to simply collect their leaves when they're ready. And I was able to get more lamb's quarters this year than I've ever grown in spinach. And to me, they taste very similar, and they're used in the exact same ways, except they just have such a desire to grow that I don't have to do anything except collect the leaves and not weed my garden of them until they're ready to harvest. Now, there's also gleaning. If we're not out wild harvesting berries and greens and all of the beautiful things that the environment provides for us, we can also go and clean up after other people are done with picking. And so this is a little bit different from foraging in that this is picking what's available in purposeful food production scenarios. So somebody's garden or their backyard orchard, after they're done with what they needed. And so we all know the memes about careful, it's zucchini season. And I love zucchini season, and I always welcome the zucchinis because I enjoy them. But it's also people's apple trees when they've picked so much and they won't be able to use them all. Being able to go in and support that family so that they don't have to clean up all the apples afterwards, and also to have something in return for your family, is a beautiful opportunity for building food security. So food production is the next step from having food stores. We then look at, well, how do I replenish those by both my own efforts and by participating within my community. Once we have that food, though, we have the notion of food preservation as food security. So this includes things like canning and fermenting or storing dry goods. And for us, that looks a little bit different than it would for other people. For most people in the city or urban environments, freezing is the most common form of food preservation that they'll engage in. And that was me years ago also, but being off grid and not really being able to run freezers all year round, or at least up until this year, it meant that I had to learn other methods of food preservation. And canning is now my absolute go-to. And in fact, over the last month, I was able to can a half bison and to put that up for my family and to store it. And this allows me to store food at room temperature without worrying about it spoiling. So I don't need energy after it's preserved. I don't need energy to store it long term, which I really like. My second favorite is fermenting, and I make a lot of sauerkraut throughout the year, which my family adores, and so do I. And those probiotics, they're incredibly important to ensure that
Oh, I lost you. Oh, yeah. Well, while we're waiting for her to come back, maybe in the chat you could put what you're getting from this so far. What's standing out for you so far? What's been most any eye openers? Any questions that have come up for you so far from the material? Thank you very much. Kim is saying, always wondered about what Natalie mentioned regarding using the stores and replenishing them. Curious if the course will offer information on a plan to do that effectively. I imagine so. A good question for her. Mark saying a number of eye openers, a sense that I could create my own version of this as a single person living in a more urban area. Yeah, of course, there's going to be a translation there.
So I just need to say I can't access my chat because I'm on a tablet. My interest is the intersection between this and biodiversity conservation as well.
Yeah, sure.
It's a really big question for me and my core work area. So I'm fascinated by the content. So I'll just put that in verbally and
Good.
shut up.
No, that's good. That's good. So maybe what I'd invite while we have this time is for you to just be reflecting on where do you, from what Natalie said so far, where are you seeing the holes in your own situation? Where are you seeing the gaps in, what are you seeing in terms of the tools that you need, the Prism model? Who are the people that you need to connect with? What are the resources that you need that maybe you don't have? What was the I? Prism, the information? I can't remember. Information, yeah, okay. And then the skills, and then the materials. So I'm going to invite you to just, you might want to just make that list and just take a few minutes to think about what's missing for me right now. Or kind of, you could divide the page in half and what do you have and what do you need? But to get practical, to see about translating this now to your own situation. What's sort of in the way? If I were to say, great, be food self-sufficient tomorrow or start working out tomorrow. Oh, but I don't have this, I need this. So let's just take a few minutes to do that. Hey, Natalie, we got you back.
Yes, you did.
Can't hear you.
Did I
Oh,
cut out before I said that we were going to take a quick break?
Yeah, you did. You said probiotics are really important, and then you vanished.
Okay, well, that was very, very close to when I said we're going to take a quick break now. So that's all right.
Okay.
So thank you for your patience. I hope it was less than 5 minutes in that transition, but I'll jump back to that point.
Well, let me just I vamped while you were away, and I don't know if you can see the chat, what people have added, and if not, I can read it out.
Sure, that would be very helpful.
Are you able to see the chat, or should I read it?
It would be helpful for you to read it because I'm on my phone now, so I
can't see it. Okay. So Kim was saying, I'd always wondered about what Natalie mentioned regarding the using of stores and replenishing them. I'm curious if her course will offer information on a plan to do that effectively.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And yes, so I have multiple programs that I run, and I'm going to outline them in just a couple of minutes about what it is that we cover in all of those. But yes, so the first of the programs, that is exactly what we cover, is developing a food storage plan and food storage as food security. I do have another full program that's 7 months long, and that'll start up in February. And that looks at all of those deeper aspects of food security, both production as food security and preservation as food security, and then also food sheds as food security, which is what we're building up to in our discussion. But yes, absolutely, that is what we cover.
That's great. And then Kim was saying, I have lots of materials, but for me, so much of it is time first and then space for storage. Yeah, Mark was saying definitely first goal would be to get to a
Absolutely.
3-week supply.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, I was just
Definitely,
having,
yeah, having space is a big deal. And this last year in our programs, we had people who were living in apartments in very densely populated cities in our program. And one of the strategies, one of the aspects of our planning with that person and the coaching that we offered was, where are you going to store this? How are you going to find space for this? And locating what those opportunities are. So space might be a barrier, but it's also an opportunity to find, well, how could I include food storage in my home, regardless of what size it is? And right now I live in a tiny home and I have my food just outside the tiny home in a shed that I heat. And so there's often creative solutions to some of these problems, but that's often one that people need to identify for sure.
yeah. Okay. Well, back over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for those questions. So I'm going to see if I can get my slides back up also. And that might take me one moment here. And so I'm just going to chat away with you while I do that and get that going. So I was talking about food preservation as food security, and fermentation is one of those things. Those probiotics are so critically important because they allow us, when we've put out all this energy on growing or producing this food, we need to be able to digest that effectively. And those probiotics are a big part of our body's ability to make use of the nutrition that we have access to. And so that's one of my favorite also methods of food preservation, because it allows us to make use of those foods that we've put up for our family. So I'm just going to share the slides here where we were before, so that should come up right about now, and then I'll continue on. So we also have a few other methods of food preservation, and depending on people's context, there's going to be appropriate methods. And dehydration used to be my favorite method because it takes up so little space, and this addresses some of those space concerns. Dehydrated food, it's going to end up taking about 1/8 of the space that your normal food would, or canned food will take up even extra space because of storing it in jars. So when we're looking at the methods that we use for food preservation, we have to choose the one that's appropriate based on perhaps a constraint around space. So dehydrating is another great one. And then root cellaring. So when I was talking about storing carrots for a year, I do that through cold storage. And this was one that I always wanted to preserve food, because you can have fresh food this way, fresh carrots, fresh potatoes, fresh beets or onions for an entire year if you learn how to do it properly. And so that's been one of my biggest goals. And I finally have been able to learn how to root cellar or do cold storage effectively without a root cellar. And so I don't actually have an underground space where I store my roots, but I've learned how to maintain the temperature and humidity using Tupperware or Rubbermaid totes for those things, to keep those roots and those onions, those tubers, cabbages, to keep them fresh for as long as possible. So learning those skills is incredibly important in our food security. So we have access to the food that we've produced or stored, whether it was grown by us or not. And the last here is food sheds as food security. We are only as secure as our communities are. And building up those relationships in our communities is incredibly important. Knowing who are the producers and who are the processors. Where could I go buy food retail or directly from a producer? Having that knowledge of those aspects of our food shed is so critically important, even for somebody like me who's producing a lot of their food. I have to feed my animals, and there are certain things I just don't grow well, like corn. I don't grow corn. I've never successfully grown corn. I've gotten so close, and every time there's a frost and they just stop growing. So I need to know who are the producers around me who I could buy corn from. And then we have community organizations. So depending on where you live, in the city closest to me, they have community leagues where they have gardens and parks and sometimes host classes on food preservation. So your community might have organizations dedicated to food security within the community already, and knowing who those are is incredibly valuable. And then finally, we have facilities and spaces within our food sheds. So this might be a commercial kitchen where a bunch of people could get together and can food together, or it might be spaces such as outdoor spaces like a food forest that's been installed, or even wild spaces. So knowing our food shed, it actually builds our food security so quickly, because we'll have those relationships. That part of that Prism planning process where we're looking for relationships, those are typically to others within our food sheds that we need knowledge and access to. So I'm again going to ask you the question, what is food security for your family? Is it food storage? Is it learning to produce food? Is it meeting the people in your food shed so that you have stronger relationships around food? Is it learning to preserve? All of these are options, and it might be any combination thereof for your family right now. But the most important thing is to learn, well, what is the next step for me? And we might start, like I did, by learning what are your barriers around food security. Now, globally, we all have certain barriers. And for a lot of us, we don't have control over these things. The price of food has risen so dramatically over the last few years, and it's expected to rise again this winter. And in fact, it's expected to rise dramatically. I have a friend, she uses those online grocery ordering services through the local grocery store. And she's been doing this for a while now. And this last week, she commented on social media and she posted a snapshot of her previous week's grocery bill. And her grocery order, because she's on it's almost like a subscription where she gets the same things over and over again. It was very dramatic to her when this most recent one was increased exponentially. And she said some of the individual items on her grocery list had increased by dollars, not just cents, but by whole dollars on individual items. And for a single mom with 4 kids, that was really hard for her to swallow, because her budget is already stretched when it comes to ordering their food. So these increases in food prices, they're really affecting people where I live already. And in some places, they're a little bit more insulated against this, but it is going to be bringing up food across the board around the planet. We also have crop shortages. Now, some people might not see these as much right off the bat. It might take a little while to reach them, especially for things like, let's say, pasta. So pasta relies on flour, and flour relies on wheat. In the province where I live in Canada, we produce a lot of wheat. We actually are a major food producer in the country where I live in Canada. And our crops of grains were reduced by 30% this year alone. And those crops had been reduced. So that number, that 30% drop, was after many years of decreasing yields because of changes in our weather patterns, because of drought and many other challenges. So we've had incredible crop reductions across our province and our country. So we also, as Tad mentioned earlier, have delays in food. So shipping is the new topic du jour as of late, and it's taking months for things to make it from one place to another right now. And a 12-week delay is not unheard of. I actually had to replace my furnace because mine, it broke down last winter and I delayed getting it fixed, which I shouldn't have. And so I called around and to find a new furnace, and it was going to take about 10 weeks to get the one that I wanted. So I'm going with the one they have in stock because I have to, because winter is almost here. And so these shipping delays, they're affecting us, and they're going to continue to, as there's a big backlog. Another thing that might not be as apparent to people, but it led to a dramatic food absence in the province where I live, and that's for beef. Now, where I live, we produce most of the beef for the country that I live in, and we process almost all of it too. And our beef producing plants were shut down last year, and they were not able to put out anything for a matter of weeks. And what this led to was no red meat available in the grocery stores in many of our urban centers. You could not go and get ground beef. It just wasn't there. And it took a while before it was back, and the price of beef shot up dramatically during that time where it did exist, so that it was out of the reach of most families for a while. And this is in part due to the closure of those plants, but it's also because for 2 years prior to those plant closures, we have had incredible drought where I live, such that the price of hay has gone up by 600% where I live. When I started farming, I was able to get a bale of hay for about $35, and that would feed a cow for a month. And then the year before last, it was $300 to buy a bale of hay, and this year it's $150. So the changing prices around hay caused so many producers to cull their herds heavily. They culled their breeding stock. So that's their farm's ability to produce again the following year is in their breeding stock. And they actually had to butcher their breeding stock because they could not afford to feed them. And so all of these things, these are our collective barriers around food security right now. That if you're relying on that food system, which most of us do to some degree, then these are barriers that we are currently facing, whether we recognize it or not. So these barriers are telling us where we have opportunities to improve our family's food security. And these barriers are the motivation that I had in creating programs to support people to work towards their family's food security. So the first of the programs that I offer currently, and we're starting up in a couple of weeks, in our 60-day food security challenge. And the purpose of this program is to provide rapid return food security planning. And so this program will have video instruction on food security and building food security. It'll have grocery lists of where should you put your money first to achieve the greatest amount of food security in the shortest amount of time. It'll help you understand the cost of those foods and provide cost comparisons that are relevant to the regions here in Canada, at least. And also provide coaching, group video coaching once a week to help you identify those barriers and also the opportunities or solutions within those. This program is very much for people who have never given food security a thought, or if they have, they've not taken any action towards it beyond their normal grocery buying behaviors. So this will build short-term food security. So looking at that 3-month supply of food, that basic amount that would get people through an emergency or through a period of perhaps economic strife. And we do this with a lot of different resources that are accessible. Now, this is all online, and we've actually built an entire community online that is brand new, and we're building it up. We all experienced the hiccup that not having access to places like Facebook would cause. And this has really affirmed my decision to bring community connections off Facebook and to create a mighty network where we can focus on food security. So we have that space and it's free to join. And this is where the 60-day food security challenge will be occurring, both on Zoom in our mighty network and also in our classes there. So that's our first offering, is that 60-day food security challenge. This program is $195 Canadian. And so it's one of the most affordable programs I've ever offered that goes through this much information and has this much support. And it's my vow that we will find ways in looking. That's $195, 5 USD. Wah, wah, wah. Yeah, exactly. We will find ways to save you at least that much money over buying that much food for your family over that period of time, that you will be able to save money because of the way we will go about looking at food security and the way we will go about purchasing things. So our normal purchasing habits are typically not the most cost effective for our family. So we'll look at that and find opportunities to recoup those costs. And the value of this program over the long term will more than recoup those costs, especially when we look at food security. So you're not able to see my slides anymore, is that right? You're looking at my mouth. My chin.
No, I can still see the slides. I can still see the slides, but just when I see you talking, I couldn't see the rest of you.
Oh, you can see me too. I should back up. That's fantastic. Well, hello everybody. Here's my whole face. I'll stay back here now. Thank you for that, Tad. Everybody's been looking at my mouth for a while then. So that's the 60-day program. Now, as I mentioned, we have another program which is designed to help people with their long-term food security. So this is when we're getting past just food storage as food security, and we're getting into food production really heavily. So we look at garden planning and how to grow your basic crops. We look at how to use each food preservation method. We have sessions dedicated to those. And this program is called Family Food Security. It's actually a partnership between myself and a dear friend of mine, Javin. And we've developed this program and launched it this past year. So we've gone through the entire season of helping people build their long-term food security. Now, this program, again, it has coaching, question and answer, video, and it lasts 7 months long. This program is going to be launched in February of this coming year. But for those who join us a little bit early, we have several months of pre-program access to the videos where we do our instruction, and also to coaching calls once a month leading up to it. And the beauty of this is that food prices are expected to increase all winter long. And so your money now means more than your money in February or March or April. And so you're going to get more food for each dollar that you might put into it when you're focused on that immediately. And so because of this, and because we see those food price increases coming, we've decided to offer that pre-program. So before the program even starts, you'll have access to the program and to all of the resources in our 60-day planning. We'll be able to make those resources available, not the program, but some of the resources available to you for those who sign up early. And you'll also have a community of people to interact with leading up to that. So that's the Family Food Security Program. And that one is just under 700 USD for the investment. And again, because this is long-term, you get that back so many times over once you begin to take care of your family's food security. And especially with those extra coaching sessions and all of those extra offers. So why should you care now about food security? Why focus on this? We have a whole bunch of reasons, and a few of them are right here. As I mentioned, the food prices are only going up, so your money means more now than it will at the end of the winter. The second reason is that food scarcity is already here. And over the winter is when we typically experience the effects of food scarcity most in the Northern Hemisphere. And so we're going to be able to identify opportunities early on to ensure that you have what you need for your family. Now, I mentioned the pre-course monthly group calls where we'll be offering some coaching and support, early access to the materials. But this one I didn't mention, and that's that the more you learn and the earlier you work on your food security for your family, the more you can be of a support to your own community, The earlier you go through this process, the more you're able to support others who might need your help in your community in sorting out their food security. It's like being on the airplane. When you have to put your mask on, you put your own mask on first so that you're even able to help people afterwards. And that's a big part for me. I think about and worry about people's food security often. In fact, it literally keeps me up some nights wondering how families will make it through these next few months and these next years. And being able to share these things, it lets me sleep better, because I know that there's more families that will be more secure than they otherwise would have been. The last reason is this live course that we offer, where we coach you through the whole process, the 7-month program plus live support. It won't happen again until 2023. And so those who get in and join us and participate in this, you're going to have a whole year of extra food security beyond the next time that we would ever offer this course. So those are just some of the reasons for this being so important right now, even though we're already into the winter and you can't really grow a garden where we live, although where you are, you might be able to. There's some really good reasons to be thinking about this and planning out your food security right away. Now, we had some amazing students this past year who were able to join us and to understand their family's food security better. And they were an absolute delight to have in the program, not just because they're fantastic people, but because they asked questions that were meaningful for their own context and for their own families, and were able to derive value out of the experience because they asked those questions and were willing to dive into that programming. So I would like to extend an invitation to you that you begin to ask yourself that question of what is food security for my family, but also that you join us in our online food security community. It's free for you to join. We're going to start having programming there of resources, support, posts, articles, starting on November 1st. And that coincides with the start of our 60-day food security challenge, which I also invite you to join us for. It is going to be a very fast way to build your family's food security with very guided and a supported environment. And finally, we invite you to join us in our full 7-month-long family food program, which starts in February, but we will have support for those who register earlier. We'll have support all the way up to February, starting next month. And regardless of how you build your family's food security, I invite you to begin to take steps today. And being here is a step in that direction. Tomorrow, you'll have another opportunity to think about these topics and to take steps to build your food security. I've had people come to me and they're like, I want food security like now. I need to know, what do I buy? I need to buy it now. And food security, we can have food storage that way, and that's the first step. But it takes action regularly. It takes thought repeatedly to build true food security in the long term. So I invite you not only to think about this today and to take steps tomorrow, but to continue to learn and to take steps regardless of what that method is. Now, as I invite you to join our community, you're going to find information about how to join our food security focused community here on our website at reskilledlife/food security. And you're going to find links to those other programs so you can learn more. There's a lot more information about them on our website, so both on reskilledlife.com and on our family food website. So if you visit this URL, this link, you'll be able to find all of that information and to join our free community. And I thank you again for being here, for being a part of this, and for spending time here pondering what food security means, and also for being a part of my big audacious goal, which I'm going to need community support to reach. There's really no way in my little secluded life here in Northern Alberta that I could reach 10,000 people without the beautiful support of people like Tad, my friend Javin, and all of our community that's bringing their communities together to learn about food security. And so I give Tad and you all my thanks also for having me here. And I hope you walk away with something valuable in that discussion, even if you'll simply be walking away with a good question to ask. So now we have some time for discussion, for questions and answers, and to learn about this a little bit more in your context. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides now, and we can just see more than my mouth as we visit. And I welcome all of your questions. I'll even open the chat so I can see them here. So yeah, if you join the 7-month program, is everything from the challenge included in there? Not everything, but a lot of the resources are. So we have, for example, shopping lists for our dry goods, for our food storage, for building a food storage in a short period of time. So those will be included. The thing about those is those will be included come February. Those are not included in the early access portion. So if you're wanting to take action on that specific topic of building a food storage for your family, the best place to start is the 60-day challenge. But the resources that we use, they will be made available to the family food program when it starts in February. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Are there any other questions for me? And it could just be related to your circumstances or the programs themselves.
Helen here from Brisbane, Australia. Hi, thank you for that.
Hello.
I'm thanking 5 years of home science at school for a considerable number of those skills, or at least being able to recollect them if I want them. Just as out of interest, content-wise, you're mentioning mammals as food sources. I've actually experimenting, haven't done it yet, with growing. We have an introduced garden snail here that's from Europe, and I'm pretty sure it's spread throughout the world. And we've just started growing snails to see how easy it is to do that as an alternative food source. And I'm also interested in guinea pigs because in South America they eat them, they keep them under their beds. So I was just curious that you mentioned like really big mammals as opposed to there's a range of possibly all sorts of other protein sources. I'm not sure how good guinea pigs are for protein. I've explored it. I haven't actually managed to buy the guinea pigs yet because I'm not on that big a property. I'm on 16 perches, 405 squares, and it's all butterfly host plant garden with a few fruit trees that aren't very productive in it. And guinea pigs make for very acidic pee, apparently. So I'm told. So I have to think about guinea pigs a bit more myself before I do it. And there's also the cringe factor because people say, "Oh, pets."
I think we got it. Natalie, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know what? In our family food program, we do actually talk about small livestock. That's primarily our focus because most people can't raise cattle or sheep or goats or hogs. So we actually talk specifically about chickens, quail, and rabbits as starter livestock to learn and raise. So the rabbits and guinea pigs are going to be very, very similar in how they would be raised. And that's one of the case studies that we do examine. But you're right, there are so many protein sources and snails are absolutely one of them. I think the cringe factor for most people around insects would take a little bit of planning for them to get used to that concept, but they're common around the world.
There are lots of problems with insects as food because of their chitin in their skin, but snails are mollusks and that's not a problem, or at least not a known problem. But yeah, if somebody else, I've actually got a question around the intersection between biodiversity conservation, which was my thing, and growing food, like local native biodiversity, but I'll leave that for later if other people have got questions. But and in Australia, we're not allowed to grow rabbits. There, in my state, it's illegal to keep rabbits altogether. they are a major environmental pest in Australia. Seriously
Sure, yeah,
destructive
that's fair.
environmental animal. So yeah, so
Sure.
guinea pigs aren't in that category just yet.
All
But
right,
yeah,
that's
anyway,
good to
other
know.
people might want to have a go. So
Thank you for your questions.
Natalie, I was wondering just a little more clarification on the 60-day challenge versus the 7-month, and mostly from a personal perspective, I just have more time available. I'm entering my busiest time of the year, and so I'm thinking, oh, February is perfect because it's right when I things let up a little bit for me, and yet I really want to look at the learning. So I'm just curious, what would I be missing if I didn't do the 60-day and just focused on signing up for the full 7-month program?
The primary difference is that when we talk about the pantry or the food storage items for your pantry, the dry goods that that you would get from a grocery store or that you would obtain right away for a short-term food storage, we go over it in the family food program, but we're really focused on food production in that program. So, and food shed relationships and food preservation. So we just don't go over it as much. You're still going to have access to a lot of the resources. However, the one thing I didn't mention before is that our 60-day challenge, we're going to be offering it live coming up in November, but the program itself will continue to be accessible afterwards. Everything's being recorded and it'll be perennial, meaning it'll continue living whenever you are ready. So let's say it's just too busy right now and you can't do that right now, but you want that information still, you'll still have an opportunity to access it. Right now we're taking registrations for the live portion. And if you do join in that community in the Mighty Networks, you will receive the first notice of when the perennial version is available to participate in also. So that's another option. But for the family food, the main difference is we don't focus on that part very much, which is why we made a separate program for that.
And so joining the live version now, it'll become perennial. Like, so even if I have to miss some sessions or something, I can, okay, great. Thank you.
Continue to access it indefinitely. Absolutely.
Great. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I'm curious, what have you seen are the biggest mistakes that people make when they start approaching food security? Where do people screw it up?
Yeah, usually, there's a few things that people do. The first is not thinking about how to store it properly. They just figure it's going to be, stored in the same way that their normal grocery store food is stored. And the challenge is that these foods, they degrade just like anything else. Oxygen, moisture, temperatures, they can affect the ability to store those foods over the long term. And so the first mistake is just putting them in the cupboard, the same as you would everything else, and expecting them to taste good down the road. And the second big mistake, I would say, is not rotating through the food. So just putting it somewhere and never touching it until an emergency comes when you need it. And I'd say that's the most challenging mistake that people make, because it presents a drastic shift in your quality of life if you're forced to rethink how you cook in those moments where there's already something else going on that's perhaps really taking your mental or physical energy. And so not learning how to rotate your food storage through your family's current diet is critical. And a lot of people don't think about that ahead of time.
Yeah, interesting. So it's like they get the stored food, they save it, and then they keep buying the regular groceries, and that stuff sits there getting in worse and worse and worse condition. And finally, by the time they go to it, maybe it's in rough shape and it's not all actually going to last the whole time.
Yeah, Yeah, and they're maybe not going to cook the most appetizing things for their family, so then there's food wastage where people don't actually want to eat what's in front of them. And I had to learn how to overcome that, because getting your family used to those foods and incorporating it into your diet in a delicious and healthy way, that's important. Food isn't just nutrition, it's nutrition first and foremost, but it's
Right.
the stuff that our memories are made of in childhood, and we want good food memories for our families. So learning how to use that properly, it really contributes to that.
Yeah. And if somebody, you know, couldn't sign up for the program, what would you say would be the most important, like if there were 3 steps, 3 things that people could do to immediately, at least on that first level of the basic security, what would be the top 3 things to do?
The top 3 things to do right now, if you're not able to participate, is to take stock of what you already have. Know what's in the house already, and begin to assess, well, how much food is that actually? How long could I eat based on those food stores that I have? And the second would be to begin to map out, you know, whether it's on a piece of paper or a program that you have for your contacts or relationships, and begin to understand, okay, well, I don't know how to do these things, who does around me? And that's the beginning of mapping your food shed of, okay, well, who actually does garden that I know that I could learn from if I had to? Or who does have a pressure canner? If I wanted to learn how to pressure can and I wasn't ready to purchase that, do I know anybody who has one I could borrow it? And that's a really impactful way to begin to work towards building these skills. The last is use that Prism planning process, break it down into those categories, and you are free to make use of that planning process, that tool, in whatever way you'd like. And it's really truly valuable when you begin to look at your barriers to break it down that way. So I'd say that's the third piece is first, know how much food you have to start with. Begin to understand your food shed, the people around you and what they're good at, what they bring to your food security and what you bring to theirs. And then use that Prism planning process to begin to break down those aspects of your food security into manageable chunks.
Amazing. Thank you. Somebody was saying there's not a way to enter a credit card on the purchase page when I click the Stripe option. So something to take a look at. Yeah.
I will take a look at that.
Well,
and if you want to connect with me by either on social media or email, if you are wanting to go through that purchase process and you're wanting to use a credit card, A, I'll check into why that is. And B, I'm able to simply send you a payment link directly through Stripe. So I can also do that for you if you'd like.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. And for those of you who are watching on the recording, thanks for watching this. I hope whether or not you sign up for Natalie's program, of course, I hope you do. But whether or not you do, I hope this has maybe sobered you up a little bit, given you some ideas, some direction, some categories of things to look at, giving you maybe a bigger view of what long-term food security is. And anyways, good wishes to all of you and your families. Natalie, thank you so much for making the time to be with us here today. And we'll be in touch, no doubt. All right, take care, everyone. Have a good night. And we'll see you all soon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.